They are not trade deals in the traditional sense of a formal treaty like the USMCA or other agreements that are enforceable, or even agreements in which Congress signs off on them. But I think our partner countries have accepted the fact that we are just in uncharted waters in terms of this administration, and the fact that the president is using a heretofore never used authority with these emergency economic powers and are just trying to avert what could be a horrific situation, not only for them, but I keep stressing the point. This is not good for American business nor families, because no matter how many times the administration says it, whatever the tariff rates are, they're going to be vastly higher than they were last year at essentially 0 or 2%. And they're going to be paid by small businesses, large American importers, and ultimately American families and consumers.
What do you make of President Trump's conflating of geopolitics with trade policy? We've seen this take place now with India and Pakistan, Cambodia and Thailand. In the case of today, Canada, recognizing, it says, will formally recognize a Palestinian state. Donald Trump says that's a deal breaker. We can't have a trade deal with Canada. That would be the definition of uncharted territory. But what does it mean for both our trade policy and our geopolitics and our relationships with our allies?
In fairness, there have been cases in the past where there were overriding geopolitical factors that prevented us from moving forward with a trade agreement. You may remember the Colombia agreement, which I inherited when I served as trade rep for President Obama, was stalled because a member of the Colombian government had murdered a U.S. soldier. But in this case, I think it's the lack of consistency, Joe, that bothers people. A number of the member states of the European Union have also spoken out and been, even before Canada, saying that they thought there should be a Palestinian state. But the biggest thing that troubles me in talking to businesses, what they want is some sense of what the playing field is going to be, some level of stability. Tell them what the rules are going to be, because all of us, I think, want to support the president's desire to bring manufacturing back. But as you know from talking to businesses every day, the uncertainty, the on again, off again nature of these tariffs makes it impossible for businesses to try to forecast and plan ahead. And in the interim, you have a number of businesses, particularly small businesses, that are just suffering under the weight of these tariffs and looking for relief.
Well, and of course, some of those businesses in some U.S. states have taken to the courts to try to find that relief. As you well know, Ambassador, there was a court challenge on the president's use of IEPA powers, specifically a suggestion that the legal mechanism for which he's using to apply a lot of these tariffs may not actually hold water. An appeals court is actually considering that very question today, though it's unclear when we'll get a ruling. What would be the course of action for the president if indeed the appeals court decides that IEPA is not applicable in the vast majority of these cases?
If the court were to rule in favor of the plaintiffs, who in most cases have been small businesses, and that is questionable given the latitude the courts have given this administration, but if they were, then the president would have to follow the traditional legal norms that Congress has put in place for the president to be able to levy tariffs outside of the normal protocol. And those would be the tariffs, for example, that he has talked about with Brazil under, I don't want to get too technical, under a 301 investigation. And then there is a different section of the trade law that allows the president to levy some tariffs under national security concerns. But in each of those, businesses have to have the ability to go in, file, share information with the administration on how those tariffs may or may not impact their businesses. It is a much more informed process. That's what the president did the first time. I mean, I'm told he was frustrated by that pace, and that's one reason he has used this very novel approach of relying on a emergency economic power that has never been used before to levy tariffs.
The ambassador referring to it as a novel approach. Ron Kirk, the president says the deadline will not move. Well, I guess unless you're Mexico. But if that's the case,
Well,
they've also said countries can call. What's that?
He told us the deadline wasn't going to move on Liberation Day. He told us it wasn't going to move in 90 days. And I think, look, and not to make light of it, the one reason I think you've seen the markets not overreact to this is they've become a little bit dependent on the belief that when he gets up to the point of knowing the economic harm these tariffs would inflict, he has found a way to back away. He did it with China, did it with Mexico today. We've done it with Japan. So we'll have to see. We'll know by, I guess, noon tomorrow.
Or not. I look at, I don't know if you like tacos, Ambassador, but the White House has said that if countries want to call after the deadline, we'll still enter negotiations and maybe we'll cut a deal after the fact. Based on your experience in dealing with our trade partners, would they take Donald Trump up on that offer after all these letters go out in the next 24 hours?
Well, I think every country will, particularly, I mean, the level of tariffs that the president is imposing, frankly, just don't relate to the harm that he says he's trying to cure. And you've had enough economists speak to that. And sadly, many of these smaller economies, ironically, have a trade surplus with us. And yet they're still being hit with tariffs on mostly sending us goods and trinkets for which there's just not that big of a market going the other way. So I think all of us expect that if these countries can somehow get into the queue, if their president can call and, in our president's view, bend the knee or say the magic words, then relief will be coming. But the most powerful factor in this, frankly, has been the market. Every time the president has threatened to impose, double-digit tariffs above 20%, the markets have spoken and spoken quite quickly, and the president has backed off, similar to when he made the threat to fire the head of the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, Chairman Powell, at least for now, safe in his job despite not cutting interest rates yesterday. Ambassador, we'll see if that changes. Just quickly, as we look ahead to another deadline, August 1st is one thing. August 12th is another. That's when the current trade truce between the U.S. and China is set to expire. And President Trump, to this point, has not yet signed off on an extension. Are you concerned at all that we may actually see a rebound to the sky-high level of tariffs we experienced between the two largest economies earlier this year?
I'm concerned, but I will tell you I think I and others are relieved that at least the language we're hearing both out of the White House, out of the U.S. Trade Rep and the Secretary of Commerce's office seems like an attempt by both countries to really sort of de-escalate the tension and get to a level of negotiation that's going to be more beneficial to both countries. Now, to be sure, we are in a very different place with China, and not because of Trump administration, but because of President Xi and his nationalist policies. But both countries have realized there's a lot more pain to be inflicted on one another than if we can find some way to at least make sure that American industries have access to those critical minerals that we want while protecting our basic interests. And as you noted in your earlier comments, perhaps give the U.S. giving a little bit on some of the export controls.